Hi everyone, welcome to the Car Chat podcast. And with me today, I have Iain Litchfield. Hello.
Hello. Hi there.
How are you
Nice to meet
doing?
you.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. Can you tell the audience a little bit, just a short summary of sort of who you are, what you do?
I'm Ian. I run a company called Litchfield Motors. We're based in Gloucestershire, and we've got a garage, modify, sell sports cars, everything from simple servicing to big power upgrades to new products, kind of everything under one roof, really.
How did this all start? How did you get into, when did you start the
Well,
garage? And then
I've always
before then?
loved cars. So I've been a huge car fan since, well, my parents will say since I could talk. So it's something that evolved over time. I wasn't particularly academic at school. I was doing a business studies course, and we had to choose something we were interested in. So I chose the car business. And it kind of evolved from there, really.
Nice. And then, so how did you get, Litchfield Motors, how did it start? Were you doing something before then?
Well, no, I was doing my A levels. So I was doing a business studies A level, and I used to read Performance Car magazine.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw an article on Monster Miata in the US, where they would take an MX-5 and they put a V8 in it. And in the sidebar on the side of the article was a breakdown of all the costs, including the cost of the car.
Yeah.
And by chance, my next assignment was to pick a business and a model. So I made up this fictitious business of importing a car from the US and then selling it in the UK. And I did okay in the thing. You had to present it to a bank manager at the end. And the bank manager said that they would, in theory, lend me the money for the job. And so then I thought, well, maybe there was an opportunity here. So I went back and saw the bank manager, who just laughed and said that it was fine when it was just for an academic mark, but not if you're actually going to have to lend the money. So so I went back and asked for a car loan for a Citroen AX GT. And then bought an MX-5 from the US because the internet just started at the time. And I was oblivious to the fact that nobody would want a left-hand drive as it was, and it was an automatic white MX-5. It was like the worst possible combination. But in the disaster that was that car, that kind of taught me a lot. So I sort of started when I was 18 and carried on. But in the course of bringing it over, I met quite a few people and I found out that cars were going from Japan to New Zealand, and the Japanese cars were right-hand drive. So when I finally managed to get rid of the MX-5, we purchased another car I purchased another car from Japan and sold that quite quickly, and then it sort of snowballed from there. And then the business then paid my way through university in Cheltenham, and then we sort of carried on afterwards. So my wife and I ran it originally, and then it's gone from there.
So it was primarily importing JDM stuff and things like that.
JDM cars, yeah. We had a kind of big break came really with the Subarus. We did a huge amount of Subarus and the special editions that they had in Japan that you couldn't get in the UK. That worked really well. And we got in some of the magazines. And then I was sort of tuning my own cars, both because they needed to go through emissions testing.
Okay.
And also for more performance. And then customers would ask me to tune their cars. And so the whole thing kind of gained momentum.
And to put a car through emissions testing, like tuning for that, how does that work? Like,
it's pretty complicated and extremely expensive. So when we would bring the cars over, they'd have to go through what we call, well, at the time it's called ESVA, and they would go to a test facility like Ford at Dunstable, and also Land Rover and Solihull had a test facility, and you'd rent a slot in there, and then they'd run a full emissions test, and you had no control over it. So you'd hope that the car would go through the first time, but most of the time it didn't. So then you'd have to modify it to make it cleaner, but then you'd send it back, spend some money again, hoping that it would pass the next time, and you just repeat and repeat and repeat, till eventually it would go through. So it taught me a huge amount about combustion engines, just from the necessity of getting cars registered.
And is a cleaner car generally, well, is a cleaner car more efficient?
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
not
if
necessarily?
yes, absolutely. So the more efficient the engine, the cleaner it'll be. But the Japanese have very different emission standards. So they are not quite so strict on the cold start when the car first fires up. And they would fail dismally on that. So we had to do all sorts of things to get these things through. Once they were up and running, they were fine. But I think it was the Subarus used to produce 90% of their emissions in the first 30 seconds.
Okay.
So
right.
it was on a sort of 5-10 minute test. It was quite a task to get it working properly. So yeah, that was something that came when we were at college, at university, and then I took to work sort of part time on it and get these cars through for customers. And often you're buying a car in not knowing if it would pass.
Right.
Some would go straight through. So Nissan GT-R cruised through, which was lucky. But most of the Subarus would fail dismally, and you'd have to work on it.
And that presumably improved all of your ability to work on these engines. And
yeah, it gives you a good understanding, and it's something we had to do. And you had to bring the car over first to find out whether it worked. So the pressure was on to get it to work. Otherwise, you were stuck with something you'd never be able to register.
And would people pay for the car before you brought it over, or would they want it's delivered and registered? Is that?
Yeah, delivered and registered. Some customers paid in advance. Once the system was up and running, it worked well, and it was quite a nice system that once you did pass a test, it was exclusive to you. So if anybody else wanted to import a car, I hope you can't hear all the noise in the background.
I can hear a tiny bit.
That's fine. In our waiting room in our MOT station, it's the quietest place we have in the place.
So at what point in time, because I'm trying to think when I first came across Litchfield Motors, it must have been when you had, is it the R35 GTR? Is that the sort of current-ish shape when that?
Yes, the most recent one. I mean,
it's been evolved a lot since then.
Yes.
And then, because you're a bit of a GTR specialist, I guess, since doing all this JDM stuff up till now.
Yeah, well, we've always had GTR Skylines in the past, even when we were sort of very busy with Subaru. And I'd been invited over to Tokyo to see the launch of the new Impreza hatchback at the time. And by chance, they launched the GTR in 2007 as well. So as soon as we saw the car, and in particular, they had a cutaway, so you could see all of the kind of technical aspects of it. And a lot of the components are shared with Subaru as well, in terms of turbos and things. So we recognized a lot of it. So we had the very first GTR in Europe. Oh, cool. And it's worked fantastically for us. And we sort of certainly specialize in it. We probably have about 50 cars on site, and plenty to get done anyway.
Yeah, I remember I came once to drive your M2 that had some suspension on it.
Right, okay.
And then ended up doing something else, ended up getting rid of the car in the end. But I remember seeing your car park and there was like 40 GTRs or something.
There's a lot of cars, and they just arrive. So the AA will just turn up and drop cars off, and then having to work out whose car it is and things.
Nice,
no, it's worked well for us, the GTR.
And what point in time did you start putting together packages, like upgrade packages for all of these cars?
The first time I drove the GTR, I convinced myself that it didn't need to do anything to it because it was so far removed from anything else performance-wise back in 2007, 2008. It was on a completely different planet. But very quickly you get used to it, and then you start to evolve, and the software evolves, and before you know it, you're producing a lot more power. And it's something we'd always done back in the Subaru day, because of every car had to be tuned to get through the emissions test. We would provide them with a little bit more power than the standard output. They'd have more power than the UK model anyway. And then naturally, we then did exhaust systems and intakes and suspension kits. And then we produced our own model at the time called the Type 25. And it was really just to showcase what we could do, but it became a real sales success. We sold, I think, over 35 of those in the first generation. It had really good reviews in magazines. We got second in Autocar's driver car. We did very well in Evo magazine in their car of the year. So yeah, it kind of evolved from then. So we started to produce sort of our own models, basically.
Yeah, and if you're okay, so if you're building a GTR, if someone came to you and buys one of your models, what are you aiming to get to do with that kit? Obviously more power, but other than
Yeah,
that,
it depends what the customer wants. So some customers want to do track days, so we'll tailor the car towards a track day use. Some customers want it as a weekend toy, just want it generally faster. But there's lots of stuff we do where it makes the car more drivable, more comfortable, more usable every day, as well as just being outright quicker. And then we have the sort of crazy builds where they want 1,000+ horsepower and they want to do high speed events or whatever the thing might be. So we can kind of tailor it to suit whatever the customer's needs are.
what sort of thing would you do to make it more livable day to day?
Well, we do our own suspension kit with Bilstein.
Okay.
We've done over 500 sets of that now, and it has our own valving inside, different spring rates. And it's a much smoother ride. Still uses the electronic button. We can improve the steering, so you get more steering feel. There's endless options with the car.
Do a lot of people, because my experience of friends who have cars or have had cars like that, they get a bit more power, and then 6 months later, they're like, okay, I want more power. And then they come back again and they're like, I want more power. And it just escalates, chasing this never ending.
It doesn't matter how much power you give somebody, they'll get used to it. And unfortunately with the GTR, it's so competent at putting the power down that you very quickly think, well, it can take more then, and it can take more then, and it becomes a vicious cycle then. And we sort of put together popular stages of different power levels that different collection of parts you need to reach certain power. And they prove very popular, and people select what they want, but often they work their way up through the stage, which in some ways is quite nice because you get to appreciate each level as it changes. So it does work well.
And they keep coming back to you for the extra upgrades.
Well, hopefully, yes. Yeah, that's the plan.
Can you explain the stage system? Because I see, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and I presume there is a reason why one's stage 1 and one's stage 2.
It's really because a lot of customers don't understand or don't really care about what goes into making a certain power level. They just want 600 horsepower, 650 horsepower, whatever the power level might be. So we kind of group the parts together in the stage system. And what started off as a simple stage 1 was just a remap and an exhaust, and stage 2 might have been a bit more of an exhaust and a bit more power. And then it evolved, and then customers, or we develop an intake kit, and so you're like, okay, so that'll be stage 3 then, and then then you do intakes and injectors for sort of 640 horsepower. Now, well, that's stage 4, and so that's fine. And then until you start developing more parts, and they kind of sit halfway between the two, and then you're like, well, okay, well that's kind of stage 4.5, and it gets ridiculous in the end, but it's what customers recognise. It's useful for the staff. We say to any of our staff, this car needs stage 4. They know exactly what parts are going to be needed. So, it's our own internal thing. I'm sure everybody has something different, but it's something that's kind of it's become pretty standard now. Okay,
so but it's not necessarily like an industry standard.
No, it's entirely internal, and it's done for the most boring reasons. There's nothing remotely exciting. It was just to group components together and make it more understandable for a customer what they were paying for and what they'd expect at the end of it.
Yeah, you have expanded out massively from those initial days of tuning, GTRs and whatnot. But like when I had a little look on your website, and you do everything. Like I say everything, obviously it's not quite everything, but just having a little look. You've got an Alpine A110. I'm one of them in.
Yeah.
Had a bit of a play with that.
Yeah, they're good cars, very good cars. I think. Well, first and foremost, I'm a car enthusiast. Most of my staff, all of our staff, are car enthusiasts. So we're very lucky that we can cherry pick the cars we want to work with. So we tend to only work with good cars, which makes it easy for us, makes it fun. So as soon as we heard of the Alpine coming, we were at the Geneva Motor Show. My wife and I, we saw the shell and the original design. We thought, it's fantastic, lightweight, it's completely different. We'll get one. And sometimes they're not particularly good from a commercial point of view. We're never going to sell thousands of Alpine turbo kits or whatever. But it's just a great car, and it's good fun to work with nice cars. And we're doing a lot of Porsches now, McLaren, We're doing really well with the new GR Yaris, which is a fantastic little car.
Right, yeah. How's that been?
It's brilliant, and it's funny. It gets more interest than anything else. If I put a post up about anything to do with the Yaris, it gets sort of 10 times the response compared to you could have a 1,000 horsepower GTR or McLaren or whatever it is, but everybody wants to know about the Yaris. So it's definitely the car at the moment, and it is a great car.
It's I'm driving one in a couple of weeks' time. So I haven't driven one yet. What have you done with that car, or what have you aiming to do with that car?
We've done suspension to make it more comfortable and handle a bit better. We've got a small power upgrade that we've done. We're doing exhaust. We're doing seat rails because you sit too high in the car.
Oh yeah, I heard that.
Just simple things really. We're hoping it'll be our next Subaru Evo that we used to be so busy with. It's the everyman hero car. It's just a great, affordable, fun car.
Yeah, finally a car that's come out that's like reasonably affordable that is quite cool. Whereas often you look at these things and they're just, all the cool ones are 70, 80, 90, 100, up in price. Even GTRs. Like, how much is a GTR now? Like a normal
GTR is sort of 85, 90,000 now. So they've really gone up in price. 52,900 when they came out. So it's increased significantly.
Didn't they have, like, at one point it was like 10 grand a year or something? They were going up.
They would do like 5 or 6 grand jumps. Yeah. I think with the GTR, Nissan have never been particularly fussed about selling quantity. It was always a halo product. So they would try and find a natural balance for where, I think they only sold like 5 or 6 Nismos last year. We sold 2 or 3 of them. So they're not that concerned about the sales on the GTR. But the Yaris falls into just the right price point. And interestingly, a lot of our more wealthy kind of car collector customers, they're all buying Yarises because it harks back to their fun youth that they had and stuff like that. So it should be interesting over the next year or two with that car.
Yeah, it's interesting. And like you said, I think most of the people, I know a few people that have bought them and a lot of people that are interested. And most of them have, well, I know loads of people that are interested, but like some of the people that are ordering, like you said, they all have loads of other very expensive cars, and they're like, I want a Yaris.
and it's quite funny that they can't get them straight away as well. Yeah. So they're sort of stomping their feet that their local dealer can't supply one till the summer or the winter.
Yeah, and they're going for overs, aren't they?
Yeah.
People like Romans are buying up a Yaris.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's good fun.
So you pick cars you kind of want to work on, and then what else have I seen you had? A while ago, 911T, which I presume, was that for you the start of working with that engine, the turbocharged Porsche?
It started working with that 3-litre engine, we got one of the first ones. Yes, an amazing car. A really, really good car. And the engine itself is superb. So we've got a Carrera T. We just bought ourselves a 992 as well to work on that. I just think they're just, at the moment, they're probably one of the best all-round cars you can buy. They're so competent, like just all the boring stuff, and yet they're blisteringly quick when you want them, and there's plenty of scope to make it more individual with tuning. I love the new Porsches. They're superb.
Yeah, and this whole world of most modern cars having turbocharged engines, I guess for you guys is like the best thing ever.
It's brilliant. Yeah, you've got the combination of turbocharged engines and extremely strict emissions, so that the exhaust systems are really compromised. But the engine, in order to make any kind of reasonable power, is extremely efficient. So when you uncork it, it just naturally makes great performance improvements.
So if you take, have you got an S or a Carrera?
I bought a normal Carrera because ultimately we'll be doing turbos, I'm sure. So the rest of the cars are saying the turbos are marginally smaller. But even a retune on that gives you another 100 horsepower. So it's a different car, it's amazing.
And then is that, did you just basically swap out the exhaust? And then
that's just a remap. That's just literally calibration work. If we change the exhaust system as well, it'll give it another 20, 30 horsepower.
And why is it so easy to give it like 100 horsepower? What's in
just
there?
Just because the core engine is so good, and manufacturers will often build a car to the end of life. So if you look at the GTR, it came out at 480 horsepower. But that car was tested right back at the beginning to over 600 brake to be 100% reliable. I think it was like 640, 630 horsepower was 100% reliability in terms of how reliable it would be compared to running 480. So they then every year, as you see, they just bring out a little bit more power, a little bit more power, and we can just skip that whole process. And you know, so you have to take it in stages, but it's quite clear when you see the data coming back from the engine what it can and can't do. So yeah, some of the new stuff is very, very good. And I also think because we're in the last throes of combustion engines, a lot of the technology manufacturers have held back. They're just putting into the engines now because they've got kind of nothing to lose in it, and so they make incredible power.
So how do you work out that you know, it's a great situation that they built it for whatever 600 horsepower or something, but how do you know that it can take 600 horsepower? Do you just wind the boost
on the
up
GTR, we know the people that tested the engine for Nissan because they sent it out for third-party testing, and we know people at Nissan. But other cars, you can just see from the data, from temperatures, pressures, how hard the engine is actually sort of working. And so you can make good educated guesses on what power levels to set things out.
Okay, so you can wind the boost up a little bit, watch and see all the temperatures, everything.
Yeah.
And presumably as it's starting to reach the point where it might explode, all these numbers start to rapidly go up. Exactly.
It's an exponential increase. You'll see that the temperatures and pressures will start to drastically go up at a certain point. And as soon as you back that back a little bit, it's completely happy again. So you can sort of quietly work on it. We've got dynos, engine dynos, everything to test it on.
So if you put, let's say 100 extra horsepower in your C2, is that pretty much, you'd be reasonably confident to say, would you provide some sort of engine warranty on your work?
we warranty all of our workmanship, and we warranty the components we install on the car. We don't warranty the rest of the car, but then the manufacturer any tuning you do will void the warranty on that area. But if your electric windows pack up or your air conditioning, you've still got cover with the manufacturer. But if you have a drivetrain problem, you're going to have an issue if you take it back to Porsche. And there's no way of hiding. We get asked all the time if we can hide it from the manufacturers, but there'll always be a way for them to test. So it's much safer to explain to the customer that no, if you choose to tune the car, then you are going to void that element of the warranty. That's just, you know, the question they have to ask themselves when they want to do it.
Yeah. And it's always something, because I've had a few cars where it might have been an option to, you know, bump the power up a little bit, and it's that trade-off of going, well, do I want my warranty, or am I? And I've so far I've never done it, but it's definitely appealing. Some of the easy power gains, especially on something like a Carrera 2 or something like that, because you're saving so much on the price. But
there's also things manufacturers do on other cars where, you know, you take an Audi R8, for example, V10, a plus and a non-plus. The airbox is marginally different on the plus, but other than that, it's mainly that they don't give you full throttle on the non-plus.
Okay.
So that is the difference in, you know, it's like 40 horsepower, 50 horsepower difference, just because they don't open the throttle. It used to be the same with the V8 AMG C63s. As you go up in the power levels, it's just that Mercedes gave it more throttle. So the relationship between the accelerator and the throttle changed. So it's, you know, there's simple things like that you can do where you just let it do what it wants to do.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of in BMWs, people would be like, "Oh, can I have the CS map or whatever?" And
yes,
it's just that. Like,
yeah, we do a lot of that. We do a lot of that with the M4s. We'll put like GTS software in the gearbox. We'll put CS software in the differentials and steering system, because mechanically it's the same. It's just the calibration difference. And, you know, the difference between an early 2014 M4 and the more recent ones is huge in terms of the way it drives, but really it's just calibration as BMW have improved it. So we'll do that. Yeah, exactly.
I can't remember what car it was, but there's loads of modern cars where you buy the car and they basically unlock the options afterwards, like whether it's sat nav or whatever. Like the car, it's cheaper for them to put all the sensors in and everything,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then
Make it once. Yeah.
make it once, and then you just, you pay 500 quid and then you go put a 1 where there was a 0 in the code.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, no, they're good. I mean, obviously, you can't fault them for it. I mean, they're
fair.
trying to do it the best they can, and obviously, they've got a life cycle to think about for the car. So they probably don't like people like ourselves coming along and skipping a stage or two.
But you've got, like you said, you lose the warranty, and for a lot of people, that is enough to stop them doing it. And you have to search it out and whatnot, and then they'll.
Yeah, you have to go into it with your eyes open. You can't, and I think it's unfair on the manufacturers to expect, if we've meddled with a car, to expect them to pick up the pieces if there was to be a problem. That's just just not the way it should work.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I've turned my boost up to some stupid number and the engine's exploded. Can you give me a new engine? No.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely not happening. In terms of the sort of power levels, let's say your stage 1 power levels, is the car, occasionally you hear, or I've heard, that cars can become slightly more efficient in everyday driving. Is that?
I think it's more the case on diesels, which
Right.
is not something we do an awful lot with, and that's more just the way a diesel engine works. If you run more boost through it, petrol cars, not really. Certainly not the new ones. The older ones, maybe like a GTR, where we'll tidy up the fuel map, and they would run particularly rich outside of the areas they normally work in. So if the car accidentally overboost, it would run very rich. So if we tidy that up, it's a little bit better on fuel. But most cars or most manufacturers are so conscious of emissions and fuel consumption that there really isn't much of a gain to be had for that. Once the car's up and running on full power, yes, we'll make an improvement, but sort of cruising around, it'll be almost non-existent.
Yeah. And when you're doing a map for a car, because most performance cars nowadays, apart from the old McLaren, you can put kind of whatever fuel within reason you want in it, and then it will be okay. But when you've remapped stuff, does that narrow a bit? And you say, okay, I'm put it in
will
98
do, yes.
or something.
Yeah, you still keep you should keep all of the manufacturer safety features in there. So they have extremely complicated ignition timing maps and things. Some of the Porsches, for example, can have like 64 different maps. Okay. So you might only need to adjust some of them that are to do with good octane, but if it detects poor fuel quality, it then drops back down onto the lower maps. So yeah, again, it's all about understanding the car, the engine, the ECU, and it takes time. It takes time to work through it all.
And is that getting harder as time goes by and newer cars come out to sort of crack the ECU?
It can do, yes. For the Yaris, for example, there's no way into that ECU right now. Once we can get into it, then we need to understand what they've done and why they've done it.
Yeah.
And then we can make adjustments from there. So it will take a little while to perfect some of the ECU tuning on some of the cars. Some of the stuff where it's got like a Bosch ECU, we're kind of used to the language now. So whether it's a Mercedes or McLaren or Audi, it's essentially the same ECU, and the logic behind it is essentially the same. So that makes life easier. But it still takes a lot of time on the dyno and on the road just to understand it all.
Yeah. Have you done, what McLarens have you done? You've done a 720?
Yeah, we had our own 720. We had that for 9 months. So we did quite a bit of work with that. That's a bonkers car. And we've got a 570 GT now. Because it was a lot more popular, a lot more of them. So we've done a lot of work on that. In fact, we just had Evo magazine in it yesterday. So we've done differential, because all the McLarens have an open diff.
Yeah.
So when you really push on, it can catch you out on track with the open diff. So that works very well. Done suspension to make it ride a little bit better, handle a bit better. And we've done more modern turbos, so it spools up faster, makes more power, less temperature, and ECU work as well. So we've done an awful lot on the 570.
How much changes between a 570 engine and I guess I don't know when that came out timeline, whether it was 720, but between let's say a 570 engine and either a 650S or a 720.
Very little on the 720. 720's slightly larger. It's 4 litre instead of 3.8, and they run a slightly larger version of the old Mitsubishi turbos that they had on there before. So they get the extra performance that way. We've just gone through it and tried to modernise it where they've used older parts to just bring it up to date, and it makes it drive much, much better.
All right. And what sort of power are you getting out of the 570?
570, we've kept it about 720 horsepower because it puts it down so well.
Yeah.
And if you go more than that, it becomes a real handful and probably less enjoyable to drive. And the goal wasn't necessarily to make it the fastest thing; it was just to make it nicer.
Yeah.
The 720 we did one the other day with just downpipes and a remount that was like 80 to 85, something like that horsepower. It was just ridiculous. I mean, absolutely ridiculous how quick that car was. Almost to the point where you wouldn't want to drive it an awful lot because you drive it once, scare yourself, and then put it back in the garage, take something else, because it's just too much. And that's the problem with some stuff. You can just go too far.
Yeah.
So it's finding that right balance.
What's the scariest car you've built?
Some of our GTRs have been wild. We've got a track car, which is good fun. It's about 300 kilos lighter. And that's proper fast, proper quick. We built another one, actually. It's got a load of aero that we're taking to the Nürburgring. We've done a few trips there. And that's frightening, mainly because it's way beyond my capabilities of driving. It's so fast, and it's got aero as well. So every time you think you're going too quickly, it's like it's nothing. So then you go quicker again, and you start to realize that now you're going so fast that it's way beyond my understanding of those sort of cars. We leave it to a professional driver.
Fair.
Yeah.
I get that. And then there is a certain point when you're driving on a track or whatever, and somewhere that's narrow, and you go, hang on a minute, I know I'm still within the capabilities of this car, but if something goes wrong, I'm hitting that wall really damn fast.
Particularly the GTR, it's frightening. We used to have customers, we go to the Nürburgring and they'd be saying, oh, I'm doing 200 mile an hour down the straight. And you're like, you're not a particularly good driver. And this car is at the point you have an issue, you're really going to be in trouble. So yes, they can be almost too quick, too good for their own good sometimes.
I can't remember where I heard it, but it was someone was saying it was basically about four-wheel drive. Driving a four-wheel drive car in the wet on a track, all that means is you arrive at the next corner way too fast.
Yes. Yeah, because when you turn in, it doesn't matter that it's not four-wheel drive.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's and it lulls you into a false sense of security. And we put additional traction control systems and stuff on the GTR to contain it all. And but even then, it can be a wild ride, and to the point where I certainly have to mentally tell myself to keep my foot down because it's accelerating at such an uncomfortable rate, and every time you change the gear, it's just the same, and you're like, no, this is too much. But it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah. So with the more nutty end of GTR, what sort of power have you?
We've done some at sort of 1400 horsepower.
Okay.
And that's more than enough.
And at what point?
And certainly 1400 horsepower in cars that weigh less, it's too much. The GTR, as ridiculous as it sounds, it sits nicely around 800 horsepower.
Okay.
It does it. Everything's happy. It works, but you're too close to that magic 1,000 horsepower, and people want 1,000. So then you do 1,000, and it will do it, and it will put it down. But you're really traveling on 1,000 horsepower. A genuine 1,000 horsepower GTR is ridiculously fast. And then after that, it's just bragging rights.
Yeah. Well, I've got 1,500.
Yeah, exactly.
In something like a 1,500 horsepower car, like at what speed does it stop pulling unbelievably hard?
Well, you're now into traction issues. So you'll spin all four wheels in fourth in the 1,400 horsepower. So you might only be able to use 1,400 in sort of top end of fourth or fifth gear. So you have to control the torque in the lower gears.
And do you map that in?
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, and then you're relying on traction control systems to cope with subtle changes in roads, because then the road surface becomes important. A bump that on a on some of the bits, so around the Nürburgring, for example, there's certain bumps which aren't even something you'd register in an M3 or M4. Yeah. It's not even a concern, but you'll go airborne in a GTR because you hit it so much faster. And it's stuff like that catches people out. So you have to be quite careful.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like, yeah, weird. Putting a diff, and is it just a locking mechanical diff? I said just, but like in the McLarens, that is an inspired idea. I've never come across.
It's not
that
really. It's kind of what
sense.
Every manufacturer does. It's more of an interesting one why they bothered not doing it in the first place, because their race cars have it. It adds. We weighed it because one of the arguments was it adds weight.
Yeah.
Well, it added 2.4 kilograms.
Okay, that's not enough.
It's really not. You have more traction in a straight line, more traction out of a bend. The car's more stable.
Yeah.
There's just no downside to it whatsoever, outside of maybe cost. So yeah, it's transformed it, but it was trying to find a compromise that wouldn't upset the electronics, because we've got some clever electronics on there to simulate a diff.
Yeah. So
I feel like we've got something now that mechanically sorts out the balance of the car before anything else. So it's straightforward.
Okay, so
and it just grips.
So the sensors and stuff that would normally detect one wheel going faster than another and then brake it, they're still there.
That speed difference isn't there now.
But the wheels, they never get to that situation where it needs to.
Well, they can, but it's done at a smooth level, so the diff isn't wound particularly tight, so the electronics can still kick in. But for most sort of high speed driving or a small drift and things like that, the electronics haven't woken up and realised what's happening before the mechanical side of things is got everything back in line. So it does work very well. Yeah,
no, that sounds like it seems stupid that this is something you have to do, but it sounds like a very good thing. It sounds like it's the thing people do on their 2 Series. They're like, oh yeah, it'd be way better with a diff. And you're like, yes, it would. But like, you've actually got to do it on a McLaren.
Yeah, but you can see from their point of view that the car, they can do, on standard engine performance, they can get away with an electronic side. And most customers aren't going to drive it hard enough to notice. So now you're catering for a smaller minority. So, and then you throw in the cost difference and all those sort of things. And so I can understand it from a cynical point of view, but it makes such a difference to the improvement. And every McLaren has the same gearbox. So it can fit in a Senna or 650, or it'll just transform all of them. So
because that's the thing. I haven't had a chance to drive one, but the 765, I feel like a lot of the feedback I've got from various people, it sounds like that sort of power figure is when you're really starting to run into issues with that lack of a diff.
It becomes really spiky. I mean, I've not driven one, but I tuned plenty of 720s at a bit more power, and it becomes unpleasant to drive them because you're leaning on the systems, and the systems are struggling, and they intervene at the wrong point, and so I mean, again, for most customers, they'll just put their foot down in a straight line, scare themselves, and go, that car's amazing. But when you really push it and it hits bumps and it has to deal with bumps at the same time as putting power down, it starts to unravel quite quickly.
Yeah, and that feeling of one wheel spinning in something that's got power, of one wheel spinning up, is it's not good. It's just
Well, that was the main driver for doing the 570 diff, was because I took it to the Nürburgring, and to drive it properly, you have to start turning off the traction control systems because they just get in the way. And then it would just light up an inside wheel, and then all bets are off, because it wouldn't do it predictably either. It would just suddenly hit a bump at the wrong point, and it would just be enough to then light it up. And then once it gets to start spinning,
that's it.
It would, it wasn't pleasant.
And presumably you cook a lot of brakes if you drive it.
Oh, yeah, hugely, because it's trying to clamp, and do stuff, and just gets in. Yeah, it's just a pain, basically.
Yeah, it's that thing everyone says don't do. Although I think in karting it's not quite the same, but like driving with both pedals at the same time, slamming on the brakes.
Well, it's like it's like one of those like learner driver cars where somebody else has got the brake pedals, because you're not quite sure when it's going to suddenly do something, and that can be unpredictable.
And that just wants you, like, I don't want to drive a car that's like that. Like, but if you don't know what it's going to do, and
yeah, but you have to be
reality,
driving it hard. Yeah, you have to be driving it hard. So that kind of narrows the number of people who'll be stupid
pretty
enough
small,
to take a McLaren around the Nürburgring. But it just makes the car much better, much better. And it'll be interesting to see if they put diffs in the new cars, because if they're going to have hybrid power, they're going to have a lot more torque low down. So it'd be interesting to see if they revert back to what, there's no coincidence why one of the best handling cars is a GT3 Porsche, and that has a mechanical rear diff, doesn't it? So
yeah, I had a Boxster, 981 Boxster when they came out, and this was sort of beginning of my learning to drive, not quite learning to drive, but you know what I mean. And the salesman said, I was like, oh, should I get the diff? And you had to get a few things. You had to get the Sport Chrono, this PASM, the suspension, and then you could have the diff. Like, it was like that was the option. And he was like, nah, you won't notice it. No one cares. Like, it's not worth the 600 quid or whatever it was. And then I remember, like, a year later in on Alpine Road or something, just distinctly feeling one wheel like starting to burn up, and like, ah. And then from that moment on, everything has had a diff.
Yes. Yeah. No, it makes things much better.
Yeah, it's a funny one. Oh yeah. So what's the difference between a good tune and a bad tune? Because you can get a tune and a tune, for example. Like, loads of people offer tuning. And what does a bad one look like? And what does a good... Obviously, you can't tell from the outside other than the people. But like, what sort of things?
We see it a lot. I guess it's the same as any industry, isn't it? You get back what you put into things, and there's shortcuts around, and we see it a lot. And it's just normally a lack of care and attention and time spent on things. That's really what you notice. And you start finding the ECUs sort of working too hard to try and compensate for not putting the right values where they need to be. And then the whole driving experience isn't as good. And it's not just the outright horsepower. Actually, making the number is relatively easy. It's the drivability side that it takes the time. There's no coincidence why there's thousands and thousands of maps in an ECU to help with drivability. And just changing a handful of them isn't going to make it any better. So
what
we don't tend to concentrate on what others do, to be fair. We just do our own stuff.
Yeah. What percentage of those maps do you change? Or does it vary from car to car?
It does vary from car to car. Well, to give you an idea, and this is the scary thing, is that you can very quickly see tunes where people clearly don't know what they're doing. So on a BMW M4, for example, you might need to change maybe 120 maps, something like that, to get the right result, to get it working properly. It's all working as it should do. But we'll get files in that are terrible to drive and make less power, and they've changed 450 something because they just don't know what they're changing.
Right.
So they might see, and there's really scary ones where they'll see something to do with torque, so it'll be like a torque limit. Anything that mentions torque limit or anything like that, they'll lift them out of the way. But then, of course, when the car has a problem and it goes, okay, I'll drop back onto one of my safe maps. Now that torque limit's lifted out of the way, and now it's even worse. So you see some real scary stuff. So yeah, if you're tuning a car, when you've got it set up right, you don't have to change a lot. I mean, the GTR is immense, the amount of map changes we make. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that, but we really understand that ECU.
Yeah, and years of tuning it and driving cars. Because I imagine there's probably some people that almost don't necessarily drive it. They're just like...
Well, we own the cars. That's the big difference. If we're tuning a Porsche, because we own a Porsche. We bought 992s, we bought Mclarens, got the Alpine, Yaris's. You can't just pop it on the dyno for an hour and go, oh, that'd be better. You've got to live with it and understand it. But that's half the fun anyways. You want to just take a customer car and make changes and send him on his way. You'd want to understand what you're doing properly.
Yeah, I imagine that you get a lot out of that, like being able to drive a car over a long period of time, tweak this, tweak that, you suddenly end up in a different situation, temperature or whatever, and you're like,
Yes.
oh, this is not quite right. And then
And also you get improvements that way, because it's like ever decreasing circles, that you make a tiny change here and it suddenly opens up another opportunity there, and you just slowly evolves over time. Because there's no time pressures when it's your own car. You can take as much time as you need to perfect it.
What do you think? So the newest one you've had is the Yaris.
Mm-hmm.
Have you got any other cars in your sights?
I'm looking forward to seeing what the new M3 will be like. That engine's very good. That's in the new M3. No, I think I'm interested to see what the new Mclarens are going to be like, the hybrids.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily from a work point of view. It's more from, my own, we've had Taycans and all sorts of stuff that aren't really related to what we do. It's just because we like having nice, interesting cars. I'm really interested to see the new GT3. Really, we'll probably do almost no tuning to that whatsoever, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what that's going to be like.
I am super excited for that car.
Yes.
And I love the fact that sounds small, I think, to a lot of people, but the front end suspension's like complete, like proper.
I'd like to know how they've managed to keep the weight the same. I think that's going to be fascinating, because it's a big car, the 992, really big car relative to the other 911s that have gone before. So how they've kept the weight down will be fascinating. And I think they've kind of done the front end now, because I think that's one of the weaknesses they had in racing, that setup. So it'll be really interesting to see how it performs on track. But that's always, for me, been the benchmark of a track car is the Porsche. It must be extremely difficult to keep up in the game each time. Imagine when they put it out that right now we've got to do the RS model. What do we do next?
Because I think it used to be, for me, it was always the RS one was the most interesting. And then when they switched to going to only PDK, they became slightly less interesting to me. But yeah, it's funny how every time a new GT3 comes out, all the magazines are like, this is the best car ever, until the next one comes out. And then there'll be a year. And there'll be maybe whatever it is, 3 years in between when other manufacturers win the awards because Porsche hasn't made a GT3 that specific year.
It's like they've sneaked in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I always think those awards are quite funny because and I understand why it is how it is, but it's the best car made that year, which anyone that follows cars at all knows that that's never the best cars.
I also know that the pain they go through when they're sort of agonising over scoring the cars, because they really don't want to give it to the Porsche again.
Yeah.
But they kind of have to each time, which is quite amusing. Yeah, and I like the confidence Porsche have with their products as well. They're always very good, and I think when they go off to magazines, they're not very controlling. Whereas other car manufacturers can be quite controlling over what is done or not done with their products. Whereas Porsche don't care because they're so confident in it.
They just know. Like, well,
it's just it works. Why should we wait? It'll work. Of course, it'll be fast. Yeah,
it's the one that you compare it against, and no one makes anything that can compare. Have you worked a lot on AMGs?
We've done quite a lot of the V8s. More simple tuning on those. We would do. We've done quite a lot of the 4 litres. In fact, we've got a 4 litre twin turbo on the dyno at the moment. They make great power. There's another sort of 100 horsepower, 120 horsepower for a remap from those.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're just good cars, but they're not. They're great in a straight line as such. They're not really. The customers aren't so interested in doing much more than a remap. They're just a really nice car.
Yeah, because it's funny. Like if you said to me, you can change something on a car, like any of the cars I own or whatever, it would generally be suspension would be my first one, and not from a looks point of view. Yeah. Not I occasionally want it to be a little bit lower, but as a byproduct maybe. It's just I want it to go down a road better. Whereas I think because so many modern cars are so stiffly sprung, and they just kind of like bounce around everywhere.
It's bizarre, isn't it? I think chassis is probably my favourite thing in terms of what the stuff we do. It's the most satisfying, and you can enjoy it at all speeds. So if you can make the car ride better,
Yeah.
You're going to enjoy it just when you're bumbling along, let alone the handling side of it. So I really enjoy that. And also it's very much a perceptive thing. It's not like in numbers. It's really hard to explain to somebody why it's better. And you get to work with some really clever, we're lucky in the UK, we've got some very clever companies that do suspension bits and pieces, and you can work with them and you're trying to explain to them what you want, and then they're turning it into this sort of shim stack or spring rates. And it's quite satisfying to do. But, and also, like I say, some of the cars just ride so badly. Sometimes I can't understand how they've signed it off. It is odd.
I think it's a lot of the German manufacturers, for example, it's just they're built for Germany, and German roads are just so much nicer in terms of a flat point of view than the stuff we deal with. That was my main problem with my M2 when I had that was it was just too stiff, and then
was it the original one you had?
Yeah, I had the original one. Yeah,
it was useless, wasn't it? And the M4 was the same. The original M4 was awful, the suspension. Yet the newer ones are really quite good. And so it's not that they can't do it. It's just it's bizarre. But the original M2 was terrible, I thought.
Yeah, I don't understand it, and it just messes up the rest of the car. Like if your suspension is too stiff or whatever, you're just losing traction, and then those engines are quite spiky anyway.
Yeah.
And it just makes it, it's weird. But I can imagine, like you said, it's quite difficult unless someone knows that this is what they're after. Trying to sell someone a suspension upgrade is like, okay, that just sounds like an amount of money, but I don't tangibly know what's going to be better. Like,
another reason we have demo cars that someone can have a drive and see what they think. But the other thing with the manufacturer, that there's no downside to the manufacturer making the car ride better. Outside of spending more time on it, there's no disadvantage for them to make it nicer to drive. I can understand from the performance, like engine-wise, there'd be compromises and emissions and all these things, but from a ride quality point of view, there's no reason other than time constraints for them to be as bad as they are.
Yeah, and you drive, and I don't want to keep coming back to the Porsches, but Porsches, generally the GT3 and RSs, have always ridden surprisingly well.
Yeah, very firm.
They're like firm, but like nicely damped.
I think just because they spent the time, that's that highlights it for me, that you have a car that is exceptional on track and yet isn't uncomfortable if you're just driving down the road, and then you get in something else and you go, that's just lazy.
Yeah, I've always had a funny thing. Whenever I see a modern Ferrari, and I say modern like the last, 12 years or something, they always have like fist-size wheel arches, wheel gaps. And I've heard all sorts of reasons for why this exists. And the one that I'd never buy is ride quality. Because I'll point at I've got a 997 GT3 RS, and it's like, it looks like it's almost slammed, and that's factory. And the ride is bloody great. And you're like, well, it's not a rally car, so.
No. They are huge, aren't they? And then you look at a Speciale and it's a lot better, and you're thinking, well, they put really narrow tyres on the normal model, and lo and behold, the performance model has slightly wider front tyres. You think, well, I think there's a lot of cynical thought goes into the model steps, I think.
Yeah, the marketing teams have got in there and gone, we need to sell cars further down the line or whatever.
We used to have the best one. We had the Subaru, the original Subaru hatchback, which was pretty shocking. Was so wobbly on its chassis, it was horrendous. You'd pull up to a set of traffic lights and it would still rock afterwards. And so we developed a bush kit to stop all this, so it had less play. And I was speaking to one of the engineers from STI at a show a year later. And I said, we've done this bush kit. It's transformed the chassis. It now does what you tell it to do. And he says, we'd already designed that. There's a part number for it. He said, but it went to the marketing department and more importantly to the US. And the Americans went, it won't go over expansion joints properly. So we changed it and they put these soft bushes in there. So it's not like they haven't thought about these things. It's just that somebody else has come along and said, actually, the Americans, that is 80% of your market, wouldn't like it.
I feel so sorry for some of the engineers on some of these.
Can you imagine all the hard work? Yeah,
because they must. Everyone, I think you come across these aftermarket companies that are like yourselves. You're like,
Yeah.
I've put a diff in a McLaren, and there'll be engineers that are like, we know this will be better. We could have designed this tons better than this random
But
bloke.
their race cars have it in. It's not like it's rocket science, you know. But somebody, they go, yeah, we know, we told them, they wouldn't listen.
Yeah,
You know, £200 cheaper per car, whatever it was.
exactly.
You know,
10,000 cars a year, whatever.
yeah.
No, it's and then it does make it when you've got someone that's really gone to the next level to do the extra stuff, whether it's like your Yaris GR. They've clearly gone to town on that car to make it a better driver's car. They didn't have to. They could have just made it wide. And those cars, I think, do stand out. And I hope they do well for the brand, because as recognition that they've actually put in, they've gone over and above where they needed to.
Yeah, I think the Yaris proves it, doesn't it? I think that the goodwill towards Toyota over the last few months from that one car is shown that, and there's a market for it. This is why I used to get so frustrated with Subaru when they decided they'd pull out of rallying or producing the Impreza. They had a captive market of loyal customers that genuinely loved the cars, that they could sell 2,000 or 3,000 cars a year. And yet they decided, well, actually, I think we'd rather concentrate on SUVs. It's easier to do and less high pressure from the customers. And I just think there's a massive waste opportunity. And then this Yaris has come along and proved that the customer's still there. That market is still there. We want fun cars, and we'll spend the money on them if they'll make them. And Toyota have come along and done an amazing job of it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many. I think we sort of get led down this route of cars that people think customers might want. They're like, oh, well, they bought this SUV, so let's make an SUV version of something that shouldn't be an SUV or whatever. And then it goes down this route and blah, 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 blah. But then you look back, like you said, like, oh, this sort of rally area. And it was sort of before I'd started driving and stuff, really. And all the Subarus and Evos and stuff like that. They were damn cool. And if you see those cars, and if you see those cars rallying, you want to buy the road car. And it doesn't. There aren't many. The one thing that rally cars can do is you can have a cheaper car, like, you know, whatever, your Fiesta or something, and have. If they did, the Fiesta like sells very well anyway. But if they had one that kind of looked like a rally car, I think that would sell a lot. Whereas other racing is always like GT cars, and then it's super high end.
And then the performance is irrelevant for the road.
Yeah.
And you know, I've kept one of my old Subaru Spec Cs that it's like a 2007. It's the last of the proper Spec C cars. And I get in that, and it's so much better than any of the latest Audi, Mercedes, hot hatches, which are probably loads quicker. But the moment you turn the steering, it's a different car. You know exactly what it's going to do. It's fun. It doesn't need to be the fastest thing. It's just brilliant fun. And I would happily take that on a Sunday drive into the Cotswolds and have a riot at sensible speeds. Yeah. Whereas you get into some of the new hypercars now, and they're too fast. And then therefore they're not as much fun to drive.
Yeah, and like you said, with the 1,500 horsepower GTR, if you can't deploy full power till fourth, fifth gear, 140 miles an hour or something, we live in the UK. Like, what the hell is the point? Like this, it
is a waste total. But people want. I can understand it from a certain point of view. People want it because they can get it, or there's bragging rights. And we've said before that the GTR is like having your own roller coaster. So when you've got something that crazy, it's fun to have in the garage, but you'd have to have other cars, because you could take it on a sunny day, scare yourself and your friends silly, put it away again. Yeah. You know, that's the only point of it. You can't drive it on a track because it's just you can't deploy the power. It's a waste of time. Yeah. Drag racing, I guess you could go and do drag racing. It's not really for us, but you could do that with it. But other than that, there's not an awful lot of point. And if you had a GTR that was sub 850 horsepower, it'd be way faster on the road because you wouldn't be second guessing it all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and it had that with the 720 that you tune it and it was fantastic. But then the moment you hesitate because you're not sure if it can use the power, then a normal one is gone, you know, because they can just enjoy it.
I've found that a lot with various cars. It's always bloody GT3s, isn't it? But the way the balance and everything, like you can keep your foot in it over stuff that in other cars you'd hesitate. And like you said, that difference of going over a little bump and knowing that it's not going to suddenly spit you out somewhere. Ultimately, it's got the grip and it's going to keep going at a certain power level. There is a certain power level where it's a little bit damp. And that is fun. That can be fun in itself, where a car that's kind of a bit scary in a way that's controllable, not in a way... Cars that are scary where they just suddenly fire you off the road, that's not fun. But I can see...
I think we had a Honda Civic Type R, an FD2 Japanese spec Civic. We took that to the Nürburgring. This is probably back in 2003, something like that. And in the rain, it was about the quickest car you could drive there because the throttle and the steering was so good that every bend you're making tiny changes, and it was great fun to drive. And before you know it, there was no chance of you having an accident. And yet everybody else was hesitant, not sure, you know, it was going to bite them. This thing just went, you know, it was brilliant. And I always try to remember that when we're making something really silly, because if you've got a 1400 horsepower GTR, when you put your foot down, you are hoping that it's going to hold on to traction, because if it doesn't, then you're relying heavily on electronics to catch it before you can. And
you've only got whatever it is, 45 degrees of throttle. So if you've got 1400 horsepower, you're adding, and it doesn't come in evenly. You're adding,
and it doesn't come out straight away. So once those turbos are spooling up, if you then suddenly have to back off, there is a moment of delay between that air being got rid of, you know, and the engine dropping power to control it. So a normal aspirated car is a lot more fun to drive on track than a turbocharged car.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's great that all of these things exist. But it does make it quite interesting. I normally wrap these up with 5 questions. Are you ready?
Okay.
They're easy. So, do you have a most memorable driving trip or journey?
I took a Carrera GT to the Spa Grand Prix once.
Nice.
For a customer who wanted it to drive. He wanted it to drive from his hotel to the pit lane, which was all of about a quarter of a mile, and that was it. And then I had to take it all the way back again. So that was quite good fun, because we got phoned on the Thursday. He wanted it for the Friday, and it was like through the night drive. That was good fun.
Yeah. So do you do other stuff other than tuning and that sort of thing?
Yeah, we've got a body shop. We've got storage facility. We sort of source rare and high performance cars from customers from all around the world. So we get to experience some pretty special rare cars.
Yeah, that's cool. Right, next question. 5-car garage, unlimited value. It has to fit into your life, as in.
I think my Spec C would be in there. That's one. Ford GT. The original Ford, the last Ford,
like the
GT.
60s or the 2004
or
whatever.
2000, amazing, absolutely amazing car. GT3 Porsche in pretty much any guise.
Right.
Like a Mercedes SL, the coupe, Mercedes S coupe. It's a lovely car. If you have to go somewhere long distance, that's a great car. My Carrera T, I adore that car. That's superb.
That's 5.
Is that 5? Is it?
I think so. Oh, maybe
sounds about right.
Sounds about right.
I think that covers most things.
That's a good garage.
Yeah.
Is your Carrera T manual or PDK?
Manual.
Is that quite? Imagine that's quite interesting with like more power.
Yeah, it's the right amount. It's about 600 horsepower, and it's just a lovely car. So nice to drive. We took it around Europe a few years ago, and it was amazing. So yeah, it makes you question then: would you have a PDK or a manual GT3 when the next one comes along?
Manual.
You think you definitely have a manual?
I think so.
I don't know, but it revs so high and you've got that instant gear change. I'm
I
not
know
sure.
what you mean, but but have you driven a 9912? 991.2?
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I've driven both versions of that car, and I preferred the manual. It's
Okay.
just they're both great. On track, I think I would have a PDK because I kind of couldn't care less on track, and manual
Yes.
is whatever. But on the road, it's just more involving having 3 pedals for me anyway.
I agree. I agree. I just,
I know
I
what
don't
you
know. I
mean.
just,
That like,
there's in the end, if you'd said to me a couple of years ago, it would be manual all day long. But the more I've driven them, they're so good, the new PDKs. And when it revs to 9,000, it's absolutely howling, and you get that instant change.
yeah.
It
Is quite something.
Yeah. So I'm not sure now.
I was thinking this. I literally ran through my mind when I was pondering the new one and whatever, because I've got my RS and I don't think I'm getting rid of that, and that's a manual. I was like, well, if I did get the new GT3, if I managed to get a slot or whatever and got one, actually having it as a PDK could be quite good. Like, it would be quite a bit more usable, not as massive difference. And like, yeah, you would get that 9,000 RPM, boom, that you get from the PDK that you wouldn't get from the manual. It's the first time I've ever thought that would be possibly something I would spec.
It's something. I drove one the other day. I drove a 901.2 RS Weissbach one. It was so good. It was really, really exceptional. And I just thought, do you know what? You'd have to have in that model. You'd have to have the PDK. I think if you had a touring, maybe. But then I've got the Carrera T, so I'm not sure now.
Yeah. So if it's in a garage, it becomes a different decision.
Yeah.
If it's like your one sports car, for me, it would always be the manual.
Oh, it has to be a manual if it's your one. Yeah, absolutely.
But if you've got others,
yeah,
then it makes it different, and they do sell. Okay, so a car that comes in a PDK-esque system, Alpine A110.
I'd like to try that in a manual. That'd be much better as a manual.
I truly believe, and I was Alpine let me one for a week, 2 weeks ago. So it was my first time driving that car, and I thought it was great. A couple of quirky, weird stuff about it, but the suspension wasn't as sort of plush as I thought it was going to be. Because of all of the stuff that everyone had said about it, they were like, "This is the best handling car ever," and it handles amazing, but it is not the best riding car I've ever been in. No. And I understand for the price point that gets more tricky, but I wouldn't buy one unless I could have one as a manual. And I reckon there are a lot of people out there that might be in a similar vein.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a suspension kit for the Alpine for that very reason, that it works okay in a small window, but it struggles for both comfort and when you push on.
Yeah, like low speed comforts could be improved. Yeah. At the sort of 50, 60 mile an hour speed, it's fine. It's good.
Yeah, so I think we've got something pretty good now for those. As great as the car is, I don't think the gearbox is particularly good. It's as a, you know, when you're comparing it to like a DCT M5, M3 or a PDK, it's just not as slick as one of those. It's good, but it's not like one of those. And I think you're right. A manual would be so much better. I guess it comes down to cost, doesn't it? Again,
that's it. I've had this told to me many a time that it just kind of wasn't possible at the time, and fair. Like, that's fine, but I don't know whether they would sell more.
Sorry, you're also again dealing with the vocal minority of people that would want a manual. But the reality is, if you were Alpine selling the car, 70% of the people would buy an auto if they had the choice. You've got to pander to that 70% rather than the others.
I've got a counterpoint, right? Yaris GR, only available in a manual.
Yeah.
How many are they going to sell?
I think they've got 25,000. I think they're going to make in total worldwide.
Yeah, I'd just be interested to know in like 2 years' time, and I know it's a different price car, it's more expensive, but how many Yaris GRs have been sold versus how many Alpines have been sold?
Yeah, I think the GR is a bit more practical. You can kind of justify it for more reasons. It's also more extreme in the way you're supposed. perceived to drive it. So I think it suits a manual better.
Yeah.
But I think if it was Alpine, assuming it was like Porsche, you think 70 or 80% of people would buy the auto, not the manual.
I think probably.
No matter how much better the manual is.
Yeah. I think you can't argue with the fact that most cars sold nowadays that have it as an option are sold as autos and PDKs and whatnot. But there's just a few of us, like all four of us out there, that's like, I would buy it if it was a manual, but
I know Dan Prosser loves his Alpine that he's got.
He does.
He's enjoying that. So they are great cars, really.
It's cool.
Again, it's one of those bit like the Yaris where it's brave that they've made it.
100%.
That's really cool that they've made the car.
Like full on hats off to them. They've done a really good job making that car, and it is much lighter than the other cars, and you feel it straight away. And you can't get that lightweight experience or lighter weight experience in any other car.
No. But then there's always going to be compromise for things like the engine's okay, but how much better would it be with a 3-litre V6 in it?
Yes, significant.
3-litre V6 and a manual gearbox with a mechanical. In fact, we've got a diff going in the back of our Alpine in the next few weeks as well to see what because that's got an open diff as well. So yeah, those three extra things would transform.
Are these going to be the Litchfield kit?
Yeah, we'll sell all of one to me. That'll be it. Yeah, all this work for no reason. Yeah,
I'd buy one of them. That would be great. Right, next question. If you can only drive one car for the rest of your life and you're allowed a £500 something on the side,
I'd have to say my Carrera T. I think as boring as the answer. Oh, no, my GTR is pretty. If I had another car as well, the GTR, as an all-round car, I'd probably say the Carrera T.
It's just a 911 just does. It's
boring, isn't it? It's you want to not like it, but and for us as well, because we take a lot of the cars apart, particularly in the body shop, and you see how they're built. They're just built to us. I think the GTR and the 911, particularly the 911, is so well made and so well. It's the thought that's gone into it.
Yeah,
that's it. That's why I like the Ford GT so much, because in that era when we were dealing with a lot of Ferraris and Koenigsegg's and cars like that, and you see how they're built, and then this Ford comes along, and everything's simple and common sense, and you're like, that's brilliant. It makes it even more frustrating when you're working on a Bugatti that you can't even get the wheel nuts for or whatever. Crazy.
Yeah. That Ford GT, I think, is a bit of a sleeper almost, in the sense that it's always been sort of popular under the radar. But the more I came across one a year ago, someone brought it on a road trip we were on. And by the end of the road trip, everyone was like, oh man, that is a cool car.
It is, yeah. It is really cool. And it's really simple as well. And it's just, some common sense has put it together, but it is cool. It's fun. It's blisteringly quick. It's got the silly, supercar doors and everything that goes with it. It's a proper supercar. Whereas the new one kind of less so for me. I'm sure it's better in every way, but it's
not better in every way because it sounds like
it's just
shit.
Yeah, well, there is that. We had that engine in the Raptor, and it was all right in the Raptor, but not great in that, I'd imagine.
Yeah, cool thing. I think did well for Ford, but not for me. Not for me. What do you think is the most undervalued car at the moment?
I really like the M2 Competition. I think that's an excellent car. Really good value. And when you look at how much they're going for in the used market, I think that's a good value car, because it ticks, for a car enthusiast, it ticks pretty much all the boxes, and yet can do all the boring stuff perfectly as well.
Yeah,
I think they're great cars.
Yeah, absolutely. I've not driven the Competition, but I loved my M2 whilst I had it. It just wasn't super practical, but it just delivers. Like, I was sort of looking at those types of cars just as random Auto Trader search, and looking at older BMWs, and then I was like, actually, I quite like modern cars, and like a M2 Competition just ticks so many boxes, and it's the M2 versus a 2 Series is just, as a driving experience, is just so much nicer. Like, when you start pushing it, it's just a much more friendlier platform. It's designed better. It works. It's got the diff in it, all that sort of stuff. It's more fun to hoon, and it's just a really cool car, I think.
They just do everything extremely well, and it's the right size. It's got all the power you ever want, particularly if you start tuning it. It's got the diff, the chassis. The chassis is a good step on from the original M2 as well. I think they're brilliant cars. Certainly as a daily, they're superb.
What have you done you guys? Okay, you guys have done some stuff with the M2. You've done.
Yeah, we've got our own M. We've had our own M. I mean, I love the M4. I've had an M4 since 2014. And if I had to go from here to Germany or something, I'd just jump in the M4. It's just a great car, really good car. And so if I didn't have that, we would have an M2 competition. Yeah. We had one for a while when it first came out, and we did work, but it's essentially the same car.
Yeah, very similar. And they're actually like an M3 and an M2 don't weigh much different, which is crazy. It's like 30 kilos or something.
Yeah, it's quite a lot bigger, the M3 as well. I just think they're great cars, the F-Series cars.
Yeah. Okay, so a stage 1 on an M2, you guys are 520 horsepower, 500 foot-pounds torque. That sounds like that sounds great. That just sounds like a great amount of power and torque in that car.
It would just light the tyres up whenever you want, but we spent quite a lot of time trying to get it to be nice and smooth, and you can adjust the power levels and stuff from the steering wheel. That's extremely popular. We do probably at least one or two a day of that sort of sort of tuning.
That does actually sound like a really appealing prospect. And then suspension wise,
we do a great suspension kit for that. It's much nicer to drive. It works really well. It's more comfortable. It finds traction better as well because it's got a little bit more compliance, particularly on the rear. So that makes it a really nice daily.
Oh, I've just on your website, you've got a little note from Mr. Chris Harris. He's got the bill.
Yeah, Chris loves his. Yeah, we've done a lot of suspension work on his car. He loves it.
It sounds like you've done the right bits to make that. Oh, it's made an M2 competition even more appealing now.
Yeah.
Right, final question. What is the most interesting car to you at the moment?
Well, I'm really looking forward to the new GT3. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they've done on that.
When do you think it's going to come? It's soon, isn't it?
Well, I've heard it's the end of Feb. They're going to kind of officially release, so presumably it's on the website to order. And then you'll have all the aggravation of who can get one or can't get one and all that fun and games.
That great fun part. I was talking to a dealership the other day, and they reckon they were going to get 8. And this generation, it's split between touring and non-touring. It's not a tick box. They're going to have. Let's say they had 8. They might have 8 this year or something. They're going to have 4 touring allocations and 4 normal allocations. So you have to either get.
And you've got to feel sorry for them because what do you do? I mean, if you're the dealer and you know you're going to get 8 for the year, how do you divvy that up? It must be really awkward.
It must be an absolute nightmare, and I think they get a lot of shit from customers and other people, and I think rightly so sometimes. But they've got to decide somehow, and if someone gives them more business than someone else, I can't see a reason why you wouldn't give them that car. Like, it's
a common sense.
You've got to do it somehow, and maybe every now and then you pick a customer that's just been a customer for yours for a really long time, and you give them a car. Yeah. But it does grate a little bit when.
Well, I tried to get a touring before we bought the Carrera T, or before the Carrera T came out, and we just couldn't. We couldn't get a new one at the time. And we bought the Carrera T, but it was because really it was more relevant to the business. Yeah, and it's been great, and I wouldn't change it. I can keep that car forever. But we've done a huge amount of business now with the local Porsche dealers. So it'd be interesting to see when it comes around what's said. But I do feel sorry for them to a degree because it must be extremely difficult. And at the same time, if you're Porsche, you want to keep that exclusivity, don't you? So
I just
balancing act.
I think there's 2 sides on that. I wish they'd make as many as possible. Like, honestly, I couldn't
certainly
care
GT3
less.
As many GT3s as they can churn out.
GT3, keep the RS limited, whatever. But GT3, I think there's an emissions problem with making a certain amount a year. I think I've heard that, but Like, if you told me, okay, the depreciation on a GT3 is going to be the same as a 911 Carrera or Carrera S or something, I would be like, fine, give me one.
Yeah.
Like, I would take that depreciation to own that car. Yes, it's an
Just the
amazing.
same as any other car. So I think
Yeah.
anybody who buys it, I think that's where it leaves a bad taste, is when you get people buying them as almost like investments or opportunities to make money. That's where it becomes, because then it means you get the genuine enthusiast just doesn't get the opportunity to buy a car. And who cares if it loses, if they can afford it, half the value in 3 years or whatever the average is. That's you buy it on its merits. If you can afford it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. And then you can. But anyone who wants to enjoy it can.
Yeah, I think they did well. They've done well with the GT4 on that one. So the 718 GT4s, they made a lot. They made, I think they've made the sort of amount that if you, when they were launched, said I want one, you would have got one within 2 years. Like they just
we had one for 6 months. It was a great car, really good car.
So they can clearly do it, but yeah, I don't know. It does make me rage when I'm like, they're like, you can't have one. I'm like, why? And I'm like, yeah, okay, I understand. I don't spend any money in your dealership, but can I have one? And then you see a car that a customer's delivered in the showroom for sale a week later. You're like,
yeah, that's when it becomes difficult, doesn't it? With no price tag on it, you have to ask what overs they're asking. Yeah, that's not for me.
I had one, and the salesman who I was talking to is generally really, really honest, and he said he'd offered a GT3 to someone because he was like a good customer or whatever. They'd spec'd it in a manual, but had never driven a manual. So when the car came, he tried to drive it, couldn't drive it, turned around and said, "Oh, I want to sell it." And I was like, is this real?
Yeah.
Does anyone really do that?
Yeah, I don't know. It is very frustrating, but I can see the problems that the dealer and Porsche themselves have, but perhaps they haven't handled it as well as they could do. Really.
Yeah, I don't. Anyway, at the end of the day, it's an amazing car. I love the cars. I love the brand. I love that they make them. And if I have to wait a couple of years to buy one or whatever, then you just accept that a GT3, even a GT3 in the UK, is so much cheaper than in Europe anyway. I don't know whether this will change post Brexit, but they were always like, let's say a GT3 in the UK might be 130 grand, whereas in Europe they were like 180, 190,000 euros.
You think it would be the other way around with the demand? That you think Porsche could try make
that's it.
Charge what they want.
I kind of think they should just put the price up.
Yeah, it was cheap, but it's cheap relatively for 110,000 compared to the base price. It did seem relatively cheap.
You compare it to a Carrera, and they're just not the same car. It's like the Yaris.
No.
The GT3 to Carrera is such a different car.
Yes.
Even though they're not, whereas GT3 to RS is a step, but it's not it's not the same again. Yeah. Oh well.
How do you take your 993 on track?
997.
997, sorry.
A little bit. Every now and then. I have a Radical that I do some track work with, which has sort of ruined all road cars, to be honest, on track. They all feel like boats. But I do take the GT3 occasionally for a bit of a hoon, and I've just got to the point where it's about to have killed its rear ceramics.
Right, okay.
So I might have to change them at some point, but I'm not looking forward to that. I'm not looking forward to that at all. No. But yeah, no, love it. I love it. It's just amazing. It's the best cars.
Yeah, they are good. Very good.
I'm an absolute sucker. Well, thanks very much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been good to chat. Hopefully at some point I will be able to come up to Litchfield and pop in and say hello.
Yeah, come and have a drive of some of our demo cars when this nightmare's all over with.
Yeah, that'd be great. Cool. Well, thanks very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much.